Hi, this is Paul Malutnak again, and hello to everyone. I really appreciate you watching the videos, and I hope they're a help to you and maybe some friends that you might share this with. Today, I'd like to talk to you about an important thing that Jesus talked about a number of times, and that is the narrow gate. You know, I always go back to the scene in Alice in Wonderland where she comes up to a fork in the road and she's troubled. She looks both ways and she doesn't know which way to go. She looks up in the tree and a Cheshire cat looks down and says, "What's the problem?" And she says, "I don't know which road to take." And he said, "Well, where are you trying to get to? What is your destination?" And she says, "I don't know." And he said, "Well, then it really doesn't matter, does it?" There was a Lifeway study by their research department over the years of 2006 to 2008. And the conclusion of that was that 55% of young adults never even think about death. It's just not on their radar. I'd like to read the scriptures for today. Luke 13 and Matthew 7. He went on his way through towns and villages, teaching and journeying towards Jerusalem. And someone said to him, "Lord, will those who are saved be few?" And he said to them, "Strive to enter through the narrow door. For many, I tell you, will seek to enter and will not be able. When once the master of the house has risen and shut the door, and you begin to stand outside and to knock at the door, saying, 'Lord, open to us,' then he will answer you, 'I do not know where you come from.' Then you will begin to say, 'Well, we ate and we drank in your presence, and you taught us in your streets.' But he will say, 'I tell you, I do not know where you come from. Depart from me, all you workers of evil. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few." Let's look a little deeper into Luke 13 and Matthew 7. You know, Jesus is, even by secular people, Jesus is considered the greatest teacher that ever was. And it wasn't just because he did miracles, which he did, but he was actually, he had no social media, so that's number one. So, and in fact, many of the historians are saying that approximately 90% of the people that he spoke to were illiterate. So he used certain techniques, and I know some scholars have done papers on exactly the techniques, but let me give a few of them just to kind of put in context what we're talking about here. The first thing he did was he said things in very simple language, in language that later on people formulated creeds. A creed is something that could be understood very quickly, it could be memorized, and it could be said back and repeated in a way that people would remember the whole story. So one of the creeds is in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, and we've seen some creeds even today that are done after that, because Jesus died, he was buried, he was raised, and he appeared. Those things are very simple to remember. So Jesus used word pictures, and he used hyperbole also. And he said things in a simple way so that later on the people could actually use creeds, and they could actually repeat to one another and remember things. Some of the hyperboles that he used was faith to move a mountain, or Unless you hate your father and mother and brother and sister, then you can't love me. Remember the camel going through an eye of a needle? That was a dramatic effect to get attention and for people to start forming word pictures in their in their perspective, or the person that's got a speck in his eye and you've got a log in yours. And no one would have a log in their eye, but he used that so that people can remember these things. And so he takes things that are physical and pictorial, and that way we can translate that into some spiritual idea that Jesus was trying to share. So now we have this narrow gate and this wide gate. And of course, the narrow gate, what's the first thing that you picture? You picture a gate or a way or a road so narrow that it's hard for one person to get their body through it. And he meant for that. I remember when I was younger, we used to crawl through these waterways. They weren't sewers, but they were for the water, and some of them were pretty large. You could walk through, but then you'd get to some smaller ones, and we'd actually go from one town to another underground through these waterways, and some of them were very tight. You had to be a small kid to get through them. Of course, we never told our parents we did that, but when Jesus started talking about a narrow gate or a narrow road, that's kind of the first thing that came to my mind. But I think if you take that and you say, okay, well, what's the spiritual meaning of that? It's thinking about many people who go the way of Christ, who commit themselves to Christ. Many people lose their friends. Some people lose their assets or things that they have. And in some Muslim countries, some people lose their families. And so it becomes very hard. It's a very difficult thing, as opposed to a wide gate where everything is possible. You know, in these days, we tend to think of needing a lot of options for everything. In those days, the Romans actually, and the Greeks, they had a lot of gods. They had a lot of different options. If that one god didn't work, they'll take another one. And even in these days now, people think, well, what would I rather do? And then that'll be my option. So when we come to the narrow gate, and Jesus talks about it as being hard, that's one of the reasons why it's so hard, is because you're going to probably have to go at it alone. You're going to lose things possibly. Now, on the other side, you're going to gain so much more. But it's not always understood. I think about the struggle. Now, striving, or the Greek word, is agonize. And so it's really a technical term that has to do with running a race or being in the Olympics and things like that. It's an internal thing. Like if you're training for a marathon, a lot of it's mental. You have to, you're on the last 5 miles, and you have to struggle with your mind to get to the last mile and to make it all the way through. So being hard on the narrow gate is it's a struggle. It's an attitude. It's a volitional or a willful struggle. I want to do that, but this is going to happen. And you go back and forth. That same struggle happened with Jacob and the angel. If you remember, he wrestled with the angel. I think it was the same thing. It's that kind of a struggle. One Bible teacher explained it this way in an example. He said, this week Steve Green will be putting on a free concert at Dallas Seminary, and there's no charge for the tickets. Seminary students and others must contact the seminary missions office to procure those tickets. if enough seminarians do not acquire tickets, others may have them. If a person values Steve Green's singing, then he or she will work hard to get those concert tickets, even though they are free. And by the way, there's a short window in which they may be acquired, but diligent effort and striving is thus needed. There's an author, a very classic author. He's the author of War and Peace. His name is Leo Tolstoy. And he wrote an article as he struggled in his whole life. Even when he had everything, he struggled because he knew there was something missing. And this little article is called My Confession. Here's how it goes. What happened to me was something like this. I was put in a boat, I don't remember when, and pushed off from an unknown shore. Shown the direction of the opposite shore, which was my goal, and oars put into my unpracticed hands. And I was left alone. I rowed as best as I could to move forward towards the other shore. But the further I advanced, in the middle of the stream, the more rapid grew the current, bearing me away from my goal. And the more frequently did I encounter others, like myself, borne away by the stream. There were a few rowers who continued to row. There were others who had abandoned their own oars. There were large boats and immense vessels full of people. Some struggled against the current, but most yielded to it. And the further I went, the more seeing the progress down the current of those, down the river, of those who were adrift, I forgot the direction given to me. In the very center of the stream, amid the crowd of boats and vessels which were being borne downstream, I quite lost my direction and abandoned my oars. Around me on all sides, with mirth and rejoicing, people with sails and oars were borne down the stream, assuring me and each other that no other direction was even possible. And I believed them and floated with them, and I was carried far away, so that I heard the roar of the rapids in which I was shattered, and I saw boats shattered in them. And then I recollected myself. I was long unable to understand what had happened to me. I saw before me nothing but destruction towards which I was rushing and which I feared. I saw no safety anywhere and did not know what to do, but looking back, I perceived innumerable boats which unceasingly and strenuously pushed across the stream, and I remember about the shore, the oars, and the direction, and began to pull back upward against the stream and towards the shore. Well, that shore was God. That direction was the direction of the Bible. The oars were the freedom given me to pull for the shore and unite with God. And so the force of life was renewed in me, and again I began to live. Warren Wiersbe said this: many people who had professed a trust in Jesus Christ never leave the broad road with its appetites and associations. They have an easy Christianity that makes no demands of them. Yet Jesus said that the narrow way was hard. We cannot walk on two roads in two different directions at the same time. So the choice is really ours. We take the oars and we strive towards the shore of God, or we drift. The choice is ours, and the right way is the narrow gate.